So many things I couldn't learn till I went through.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Men's Story Project. I see someone raising their hand. BK in the chat. What's going on? Welcome everyone. As you may notice, because this is a webinar style Zoom meeting, unfortunately, we can't see your faces, but you should have access to the chat as well as to the raise hand function. And as has been noted, the closed captioning option is open. This is like a live transcript that's going to be created in case you're more of a visual learner or hearing impaired in some way. You can read along instead of listen along. Welcome everyone. For folks that are arriving in this webinar, if you'd like to add your pronouns next to your name, it's by no means required, but could be helpful later on. We'll get started in a second here, probably about 30 seconds. So if you are someone who's attending, grab whatever water, whatever drink, whatever snacks you might need. Make sure your seat is comfy. And welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being here for Colby College's first ever Men's Story Project production. I know it's late on a Wednesday night and it's late in the academic year, and there's a whole bunch of other spaces that you could be in right now. So thank you. Thank you for choosing to spend your night with us. Thank you also to Emily Schusterbauer, who is Colby College's confidential Title IX advocate, as well as the director of the Gender and Sexual Diversity Program and the associate director of the Pew Center. And it was her back in February of 2020 who reached out to me to facilitate this group. My name is Dan. My pronouns are he, him, his. And as the facilitator for this group and moderator for tonight's event, I'd like to share a little bit about the Men's Story Project generally, about what the project has looked like specifically here at Colby, and what you can expect from this night. So the Men's Story Project was founded in San Francisco, California in 2008. It's a replicable storytelling and community dialogue project that brings critical exploration of social ideas about masculinity into public forums via men's own voices and stories. Its mission is to strengthen social norms around the world that support healthy masculinities, violence prevention, and gender justice. And it works toward this mission by helping groups create powerful live storytelling events, social media and films based on these live events, and educational tools as well as ongoing gender justice collectives. The Men's Story Project is rooted in feminist, anti-racist, intersectional framework. To create the productions, Men's Story Project presenters participate in a series of weekly educational and creative workshops where they learn together, challenge each other, build community, and hone their stories. So Colby's participants in the Men's Story Project started meeting in March of last year, just before the pandemic began shutting things down in the United States. And even though we were only able to get through 2 sessions in 2020 before Colby sent students home for their safety, there was a vibe of vulnerability and curiosity and accountability that the guys created in that room that inspired us to continue the project this year. We began meeting again in February of 2021 on Sundays for an hour and a half. And I just want to take a moment to express my appreciation for the way the participants showed up for me and for each other during those 10 weekly sessions that we've had together. And that appreciation extends to every single participant in this year's group, including the couple of those who, because of life circumstances and academic workload, either weren't able to make it through the end of the program with us or are here, but will not be sharing a story publicly. The 9 presenters who will be sharing a story tonight range from sophomores to seniors, biologists to philosophers, and they've cultivated deeply personal stories, which have come out both as poems and as narratives. And they convey some key truths about men and masculinities. The first being that men and masculine identifying folks are beautiful human beings. Also, that social ideas about masculinity are taught and learned, and that they change across time and place. Also, that there's no singular one right way to be a man. In fact, there are as many ways to be a man as there are men in the world. And that as malleable and diverse products of human culture, instead of these concrete, monolithic aspects of human nature, we can change and do away with toxic ideas about masculinity that contribute to sexist or homophobic or transphobic or emotionally limited or otherwise violent and harmful realities. That part of taking positive action involves men sharing their own true stories with a critical eye towards the ideologies and the institutions that support these harmful forces, as well as sharing personal stories that provide a healthier counter-narrative. That's what tonight is all about. Thank you for being here to bear witness to these stories, and your presence as a witness bearer is important to this process. A few logistical notes about this evening's event. After my introductory remarks, which are being recorded via Zoom, we'll invite you to join us in a powerful group exercise. And after that collective exercise, we will begin to hear the presenter stories. If we were in person, we'd invite you to applaud in between each of the stories, but we're virtual, so we'll invite you to share a quick reflection or a reaction in the chat. One way of providing feedback that we've used as a group comes from a modality called nonviolent communication. And this provides a framework that encourages people to meet each other on the basis of the common feelings and needs or values or motivators that we all share as human beings. So in the chat, I'm going to share 2 links. This first link provides an inventory or a list of feelings, emotions, I'm sure things that we're all very familiar with. The second link provides an inventory or a list of needs or values or human motivators. The theory is that these feelings and needs underlie every human experience, and if we can connect with the feelings and the needs that are alive in any given situation, if we can see each other on this basic human level, we're more likely to be in connection with each other than we are in conflict. So after each presenter has finished sharing, instead of applause, we'll invite you to enter into the chat any feelings or needs that were touched or alive or nourished by the story that you heard, as well as any other reflections or reactions that you'd like to share. Following the stories, there will be an opportunity for y'all as audience members to engage in dialogue with the presenters about the stories they shared and about the process by which they created them. And before we log off at 9:30, I'll share a link to an evaluation form in the chat, and we would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to share your feedback about your experience tonight. Throughout the event, we invite you to please take care of yourself as needed, reminding yourself to breathe, to get a drink of water, to ground yourself, maybe feeling your feet on the floor, the other points of contact that your body has with the space around you, as well as taking any bio breaks that you might need as necessary. As was mentioned when we got started, there's an option to follow along through closed captioning at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And we'll be monitoring the chat as well as the raised hand function. So thank you for folks for holding me accountable on whether I sent the right lists here. And here's the needs inventory in case it wasn't already shared. Yeah, we got that, cool. I think that's all I've got for introductory remarks. Again, I want to thank our presenters for their willingness to boldly step up and share their stories, knowing full well that we're all works in progress. And we thank you for being here with us and sharing and making this a space for vulnerability, accountability, and candor. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce you to Tiger, who's going to be guiding us through that group activity.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. As Dan has already mentioned, before we kick things off with the individual story telling portion of the evening, we'd like to start off with a moment of collective sharing. So, while social ideas about gender and masculinity vary immensely, there are a common set of ideas that are particularly pervasive and particularly harmful. These notions are commonly referred to as toxic masculinity. And in this activity, we're going to invite you to join us in reflecting and sharing about whether or not and how these toxic ideas about masculinity have impacted your life. I like to make note here that this content will involve sexist language, physical violence, emotional abuse, and homophobia. I want to encourage you, first and foremost, to take care of yourself and to participate in whatever feels comfortable for you. The invitation is simply to listen to the statement we read aloud, and if it's true for you, and if you feel comfortable sharing that truth, you can raise your hand using the Zoom tool. This activity is challenged by choice, meaning you're only expected to participate to your own level of comfort. So, one of the statements could be true for you, but you might not be comfortable sharing that with us. You don't have to raise your hand. After folks raise their hand, we'll look around so that we can see that we're not alone in bearing the actual impact that social ideas about gender can have on us and how we treat others. We'll say thank you, at which point you can lower your hand. And then we'll do it all again. For example, please raise your hand if you are somehow affiliated with Colby. Thank you. Please raise your hand if you prefer Coke over Pepsi. Thank you. Please raise your hand if you get the idea by now. All right, let's get into it. Please raise your hand if you've ever been told to be a man or man up. Thank you so much.
Please raise your hand if you've ever been told, if you've ever worried about not being tough enough or not being strong enough. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever exercised to make yourself look stronger. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever been called whipped, a wuss, a baby, a wimp, a bitch, pussy, or something similarly sexist. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever called someone whipped, a wuss, baby, wimped, bitch, pussy, or something similarly sexist. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you have ever been forced to fight or were in a fight because you felt you had to prove yourself. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever felt less manly because you are not dating/hooking up. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever felt pressure to lose your virginity. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you have ever called a woman or a girl a slut, bitch, dyke, or another sexist slur. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever been physically injured and hid the pain or kept it to yourself. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever been told not to cry or to stop crying. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever stopped yourself from showing affection, hugging, or touching another man due to fear of being soft, seen as soft, weak, or gay. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you ever stopped yourself from asking for directions. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you've ever been physically injured or hid your pain or kept it to yourself. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you ever drank or took other drugs to cover your feelings or hide pain. Thank you.
Thank you all for participating in this activity. There's a lot here, and we often think we're alone in our experiences, but as you can see here, we're not alone. These experiences are actually quite common, and it's important for everyone to know that they're not alone in that. So, in return, we'd like to begin sharing our individual stories with you. We wanted to do it as a thanks for building that kind of communal trust, getting vulnerable with us, and supporting each other in sharing, even in this small way. Without further ado, with passion, I'd like to introduce you all to Eniola.
Thank you. Good evening. So the name is Eniola Adeyelawa, and I'm a current sophomore. And I am planning on studying psychology, considering neuroscience, and minor in philosophy. And so this piece I'm going to be reading tonight is dedicated to my father. His name is Lukman, and my brother, his name is Mubarak. They have always been a pivotal kind of representation in my life, subconsciously and consciously. And I just really want to express my appreciation for them. Thank you, Dad, for always being strong in times of crisis. Thank you, brother, for introducing me to chess. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me discipline. Thank you, brother, for helping me with my spelling. Thank you, Dad, for correcting me when I fault. Thank you, brother, for helping me write my love letter to the girl I had a crush on. Thank you, Dad, for sitting me down and talking to me about life. Thank you, brother, for creating a path. Thank you, Dad, for not being perfect. Thank you, brother, for not being perfect. Thank you, Dad, for your sense of humor. Thank you, brother, for introducing me to anime. Thank you, dad, for always having a strong mind. Thank you, brother, for being a mentor. Thank you, dad, for being playful. Thank you, brother, for being strong despite your inner battles. Thank you, dad, for teaching me about strength. Thank you, brother, for your terrible jokes. Thank you, dad, for expressing your love. Thank you, brother, for trying your best. Thank you, dad, for your hard and smart work. Thank you, brother, for being you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you both for making me the person I am today.
Thank you, Anyola. It was great to hear your thoughts on that, and I'm sure that your brother and father both appreciate that acknowledgement of the things that they've done for you. Hi everyone, my name's Henry Tullman. I'm a senior at Colby, and today I'm going to tell you about a story of an uncle of mine, Uncle Mike. I was never very close with Uncle Mike, but I saw him around a lot growing up. Uncle Mike was a likable guy. He was funny, charismatic, and more than anything, he liked people. I always felt his best when he made people laugh, something he's been able to do to many, myself included. But at times, his humor would go too far, crossing over from innocuous jabs to outright offensive attacks on people he knew he could pick on. His jokes were often sexist, racist, and would even make fun of people's physical appearance and weight, primarily women. Although all the other men in the room would laugh along, the butt of his jokes would sit uncomfortably as Uncle Mike would amuse himself at their expense. I recall one time he introduced me to a female coworker of his, and right in front of her told me, "If you think she's cute now, you should have seen her a couple years ago." The embarrassed, shocked look on her face right after made my stomach turn. And at other times, his jokes would evoke an even stronger reaction out of those they targeted. Once he made fun of an Indian woman's accent, getting in her face and mocking her until she slapped him and stormed off. But incidents like this didn't stop him. He would continue to push the boundary of what is acceptable and then some. He was, in every sense of the word, a bully. Now, what if I told you I don't have an Uncle Mike? What if I told you Uncle Mike is really Michael Scott from The Office? And what if I told you that growing up, I watched him for years on TV, but I've never personally had a man like Michael Scott in my life? I consider myself extremely fortunate that the men I look up to in my life are men I am proud of, men that I respect and are respectful of those around them. My father, grandfather, uncles, cousins, teachers, and coaches are all people who I love and who I've never seen cross a boundary that has made me or someone around me feel unsafe. They are fair, loving, and have all led fulfilling, happy lives, and being around them has taught me what it means to be happy. But their influence on me far exceeds simply leading by example. I could tell you a million different stories of a male family member or close friend teaching me something valuable about masculinity. But one of the more poignant examples is an interaction with a man I barely knew. Throughout high school and part of college, I was a competitive rower. It is not a surprise that male sports are often a breeding ground for toxic masculinity, but I found this especially true in the rowing world, where the culture is founded in pushing yourself to be as mentally and physically tough as possible. And every day, you're compared against your fellow teammates, everyone vying for a seat in the top boat. One day before practice, some members of our women's team had taken out all of the best single boats before any of my teammates could get our hands on them. Upon realizing this, a group of us burst into the locker room, airing out our frustrations of not being able to use the boats we wanted by targeting the women's team, some of us calling them sexual slurs. And there I was, laughing along. On our way out, we came face to face with Sky, the head coach of the women's team, who unbeknownst to us had been washing his hands, listening as we insulted and objectified the athletes he coached. We stopped dead in our tracks and everyone fell silent. Sky was a young Black man who, in a sport heavily dominated by white people, was well respected by everyone in the program and beloved by his team. He could have yelled back at us, told our coach, or even gotten us kicked off the team. Or He could have said nothing, passed it off as simply boys being boys. But he did neither. In a calm, stern voice to a group of guys he barely knew, simply asked why. Why are we so upset? What made us choose to use such sexist language over something as insignificant as what boats we got to row that day? Do we really mean the words coming out of our mouths? Do we even realize what we're saying? My teammates and I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. And even throughout practice, my teammates and I didn't say much. After that day, none of us ever put down the women's team like this again. Sky was someone I didn't know well at all, someone I saw around the boathouse fairly often, exchanged hellos with every now and then, but this is the only face-to-face interaction I really recall having with him. Yet here I am, 6 years later, sharing this moment with you in a speech about men who changed my life. As a result of men like Sky and interactions like this, I realized I grew up somewhat sheltered from the more evil things that men are capable of doing. I've seen athletes on my favorite teams go to jail for murder, celebrities convicted of sexual assault, politicians at the centers of corruption scandals, the list goes on. But these stories never really impacted me personally, as I always knew that the men in my life would never do these things. Yet, these bad things still happen. Even recently, my newsfeed has been saturated with articles about Florida Representative Matt Gaetz' involvement in sexual trafficking and numerous rape allegations against Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. Even in movies and TV shows, characters such as Michael Scott are able to get a cheap laugh from the audience through objectification and harassment of others. Growing up, The Office was always one of my favorite shows. But over the past couple of years, I looked at shows like this through a different lens. I imagine you were relieved when you learned just a couple minutes ago that I don't personally have an Uncle Mike in my life. But is having an Uncle Mike broadcast for years on television for hundreds of millions of viewers, myself included, really any better? I started to think more about young men who may not have grown up with as loving a family as I had, or with men like Sky who call them on their bullshit, even if they don't know them. Do they look up to the Michael Scotts and Deshaun Watsons of the world? Will the choices these young men make someday reflect those of the men they idolize in the public sphere? I'm certainly not well equipped to answer any of these questions. But what I do know is that the goodness of men has impacted my life in ways that cannot be fully conveyed in a couple minutes on Zoom. But nevertheless, it's a start. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. It was really, really powerful. My name is Arthur. I'm a senior physics and global studies major, and I'm going to be sharing a poem I wrote. How could I possibly look after someone if I can't even look after myself? Grinding, putting your head down, getting on with it, pulling up your bootstraps, gritting your teeth. These aren't just learned behaviors, but expectations. How can I look after myself if every time I go to catch a breath, I'm met with judgmental eyes, mocking words, and even my own self-disgust? My family are always on their feet. From a young age, I learned that the couch and the TV were reserved for the moments before bed, never before that. My parents' work ethic inspires me. Working hard all day and every day became a goal, an inspiration. Working on the weekends was normal. When the homework ran dry, the household chores and backyard projects rose seemingly out of nowhere. But working hard all the time felt normal, and not working seemed wrong, unnatural, pathetic, lazy. My time in front of a screen was capped at 30 minutes a day, but my time spent playing sports, doing homework and chores, that time felt unlimited. That isn't to say I was miserable, not at all. I love my childhood, my family, more than anything. I am, as many of us are, conditioned to value grit, reject laziness, fatigue, exhaustion. So how can I look after myself when hard work determines self-worth, but rest is selfish? Athletes understand strength grows on days of recovery. yet we as a society associate time off with weakness. Sleep and rest are as much of priorities as the workouts themselves. As an athlete myself, I too need rest, but school, social life, and even my learned connotations get in the way. So I remind myself, self-care is not self-indulgence. Self-care is self-preservation. Self-care is selfless, because if I can look after myself, I can also look after you. Thank you.
Thanks all, Arthur. I'm very very proud to hear your sharing. I've done this work with you over the last almost a year now. I'm Jackson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a junior and I'm a government major with a theater and dance minor. The piece I'm sharing, I think I'm just going to title it Big Dude. All right. Hit harder. Look how much smaller they are. Put them in the ground. Get big, baby. Use your size. I've always been a big dude. Always one of the tallest and biggest in school, on the field or court. I liked playing sports, but I didn't like who I was told to be in sports. Through my entire athletic career, I've always been told to beat down, outsize, and dominate my opponents. I think back to 8th grade basketball when Coach Parker yelled at me to be more aggressive in working for rebounds in the second quarter of our first game. Come on, Hurts. You're so much bigger than them. I was benched a few moments later for not being strong enough. For a long time, I just went along with this rhetoric and suppressed any feelings that stood in opposition because I was able to. These assumptions about strength came up everywhere in my life. Comic books, video games, TV shows, and movies. Big, strong, aggressive man equaled a real man. The truth, which I began to realize slowly, is that I felt so uncomfortable using my size to hurt and punish other competitors, and being a real man has nothing to do with any of that. I needed to allow myself the time and space to come to a new conclusion, and I encourage others to find this same internal space. Eventually, I started to learn that my favorite way to use my size is, when given approval, to give really big hugs, grab things from tall places, and to help others who may need my size. Nowadays, I know it's okay to not always be aggressive, not always try to prove my dominance, and not always use my size to overpower other men. Being a man never should mean you need to be a warrior, violent, or emotion-free. I have the ability to decide how I use my body, and I don't need to conform to a stereotype or other people's expectations of what I should do. I don't need to be a fighter, and it's okay being a caretaker. I'm A-okay being a 6'5", 245-pound teddy bear.
Thank you, Jackson. That's a great story, and I'm proud to call you one of my friends and I've done this project with you. Okay, so I'm Conrad. I'm a junior, double major in government STS, he, him pronouns. And this is my story that I have titled The Questions of Tradition. This story does not have a happy ending. This is not about a younger version of myself, an encounter I overcame, or a revelation I had. This is about me. This is about here and now. I am conflicted and perhaps confused, for I am struggling with this concept of masculinity. Every day I wake up and I try my best to be a man, be the best man I can be. I even have these reminders in my phone, in my planner, be a man, and I see them every morning. I don't know why or what that even really means. What is my version of this social construct that plagues me with this conflict and confusion? Am I a man? I don't know. I see myself as much more of a child, yet I hope those around me see me as a man. But to be honest, I don't think I'll ever be good enough. I don't think I'm worthy of such a title, nor do I think I ever will be. But hey, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't be a man. Don't men mistreat and rape women? Don't men hide their emotions and drink their pain away? Doesn't a large part of modern society, modern culture hate men? Maybe it's a good thing I'll never be manly enough. Growing up, I was surrounded by men who raised me to be a man. My dad taught me how to act tough, and my coaches taught me how to be tough. Male figures taught me to like girls and be athletic and dress and act a certain way. And I did everything they said, for I looked up to them and respected them. And even though they have left me striving for this non-existent goal of manhood, I still have the utmost respect for them, for they were tough and strong and militant and hardened and successful. They were laconic and stoic and wise and consistent and persistent. They were respectful and dignified and righteous and honest and faithful. I long to be like them. I want to be like them. A man. Can I be a man? Should I be a man? What is a man? I've gone through puberty. I wear simple and neutral colored clothes. I don't have long hair or high-pitched voice. I don't paint my nails. I drink beer. But maybe my clothes are too girly. Maybe my hair is childish and my voice isn't deep enough. Maybe I don't drink enough beer, or maybe I should be drinking whiskey. I play contact sports. I work out and strong and athletic. I suffer and I don't say anything. I embrace the pain and rub some dirt in it and keep going. I'm tall and I can grow some facial hair. I can walk around confidently. And I like hard work. I like the struggle. I like the pain. So I am expanding my comfort zone and taking the harder path in life. But maybe I should be working a job, not playing sports. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I don't suffer enough and I complain about my injuries and pain too much. Maybe I don't even know what hard work is. And maybe I don't know what pain is. Maybe my life has just been a walk in the park compared to other men, compared to real men. And maybe you felt a similar way, or perhaps you disagree with me. I've sat and thought about these contradicting thoughts of mine for days, and maybe what it all boils down to is how we perceive manliness, what we believe in our minds a man should be. I want to be a man. What that means, I'm really not quite sure. Perhaps that is it. Is there simply no more reason for debate? Who's to tell me what a man is, how a man looks, or what a man does? And who's to say I have to be a man in the first place? Perhaps my struggle is better defined not as one between childhood and manhood, but merely the constant struggle of self-improvement that everyone goes through in their own life. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Conrad. It's yeah. That confusion and questioning has been something I feel too. It's very powerful. Okay. Well, my name is Alex Falk, and I'm going to share something about that question titled, "What is a man?" I stood by the shower, pressing to swim, when some boys came over as if on a whim. One asked, "Hey, are you a girl?" Confused by long hair, I turned with a whirl. Clear by his asking, they just had to know, was I a man or just a little slow? So looking at their curious faces, I was left to wonder. My parents always raised me that gender norms weren't something important. That being a man or woman didn't have to dictate who you were. You could wear what you want, look how you want. Being a man didn't have to shape me. I could grow my hair out if I liked it. The world around us disagreed. It was built to tell us who we should be. That being a man was something that controlled you, that all men must fit in the same box. But what's a man? A male human, a powerful human, the best in the room, the strongest, the alpha. So I stand among friends, despite the lack of stakes, none of us willing to bend. It's just a game, but not one any of us can lose. None would bear the shame. Though it doesn't mean a thing at all, society tells us we cannot take the fall. None of us want to admit it hurts a lot when you play like shit. But now we reclaim it. We stand up to the system that raised us to claim our own self. Be a person not controlled by the traditions before us. We see the toxicity and we rise above it. What's a man? A human who identifies as a man, an emotional human who doesn't need violence, who's caring and compassionate. We still put people in boxes. We claim to progress, removing the toxicity from the labels, but we still keep the cages. How can we say we've moved forward when we've merely repainted the bars? Now you can choose, given the great freedom of leaving your cage to move to another. Or maybe you're neither, so you sit in the middle, free from the cages but left out of both, told to be yourself, but treated like you don't belong. When I was 3, I met my best friend, a sister like I only imagined. Still close, but despite having to move away, we talk. It's like we never missed a day. But other kids would question me how to be friends with a girl they couldn't see. But boys and girls had to separate and only recombine to procreate. We even felt this pressure. We even felt this pressure too. We ended that once we got a clue. Turns out when you love someone like blood, turns out you can love someone like blood even if the world tries to drag it through the mud. So now we've started to learn. We teach boys it's okay to have emotion, that they don't have to be the strongest. The world hasn't caught up. They told us we had to be the strongest, that being left behind was hell on earth. And they didn't lie. We push and cannot stop. The ones who do, who can't keep up, are left without, forgotten by the world that raised them. We're human. And humans don't just have flaws, but holes, gaps, and gaping rifts, things we can't remove without losing ourselves. Being different, being weak, having long hair, losing, making friends with the wrong people. None of it fits in either box, and all of it threatens to break the cages. So what's a person? A human, someone who is, someone who may know who they are, or someone who hasn't a clue. Wants and desires, born into a box, told to be, told who they are, fighting to be who they are, struggling to learn themselves. But at the end, I still love my friend. I'm still learning to play and keep the fear of loss at bay. How to move through life without getting caught up in the strife. And as you can clearly see, the questions didn't stop me.
Thank you, Alex. That was a very empowering piece that spoke to my need to self-determination and freedom. So my name is Giuseppe, and people before me used some prose and some poetry, and I could not choose. So there's a little bit of both in my piece, and I hope you will bear with me until the end. This story is about masculinity. In high school, I told my history teacher I was an atheist. She looked at me, dead in the eyes. No matter what you do, you will never stop being Catholic. I will perhaps never stop being a man, no matter my apathy towards masculinity. I surrounded myself with people who do not care about gender, or what society tells them they should do with it. But that is not enough. There are always exceptions. The leviathan of masculinity, of gender, is inescapable. This story is about masculinity because masculinity is in every story, in the adventurous and the familiar, in the crazy and the mundane. The scenario is adventurous but mundane. 5 men, 2 boats with 2 captains, 3 crew. My dad and I on our Spicy Lady, and the 3 other on Gaetano's boat. We must sail to Greece. Here already the keen eye can discern an asymmetry. My father expected me to go, not my sister, though she could have been about as useful as me. The wives neither. They'll reach Greece traveling comfortably by plane. The assumption is that they're merely tolerating, a tacit acknowledgement that they would be anywhere else if it wasn't for their husbands. This 2-part crossing is their compromise, to keep them happy. Happy enough anyways. I wasn't happy. I like sailing, but I hate living on a sailboat. So far, I had only caught a glimpse of Rocco. I couldn't deny being uneasy around him. He is younger than me, but I felt the looming expectation we must be peers. He certainly was closer to me than to his captain Gaetano, by more than a year or 2, and we both were boys. But I always have found it hard to make friends, to belong. I am the quiet kid, the reader who prefers the calmer shadow to the roaring excitement of playing ball under the sun. He seemed to me like he would prefer the latter. I always felt that there was a more fundamental, almost moral difference between our kinds. He was right, and I was wrong. On a more emasculating matter, I was there, supposedly, of my own accord, on holiday with my family. He was working as a skipper for Gaetano, younger than me and working already. Worse, working on a sailboat. Once again, I instantly felt the need to compare myself to him, to feel inferior. Had my father ever wished I was more like him? Athletic, resourceful, making a living out of sailing. One day, I had to climb the mast to retrieve a loose rope. I eagerly volunteered. Perhaps I wanted to prove myself useful, threatened as I felt by Rocco. Perhaps I just wanted to run away skyward. They hosted me up. When I came back, Antonio, another man on Gaetano's boat, set me aside and told me he had seen something on me that no man should have: stretch marks. He wasn't worried for my health. I was overweight, but that didn't matter. Stretch marks are feminine. They belong on a pregnant belly or quickly grown breasts, not on a man's hips. The real story begins once we reached the shores of Corfu. We toasted with good Prosecco to the successful crossing, and finally we could shower and shave and feel clean. We head out to a restaurant. Antonio does not miss the chance to comment on my choice of wearing jeans rather than shorts. Somehow my floppy, non-muscular body is both repugnant and I must display it proudly. On the way there, I noticed Rocco smoking. I also learned he's just turned 17. When we get to the restaurant, he orders a beer. Back home, it's normal to drink a little at 17. But then he orders another, and he ends the meal like the rest of us, with a glass of ouzo. No one but an I. Later in the holiday, my father did suggest he should drink less, but only joking, never too seriously, never concerned. I remember Gaetano, or perhaps Antonio, asking me, "What are you doing with us? Go chase some of these girls. You're young. You must want to hook up with them." And how could I not? The street was full of young, beautiful women. But how could they say that? None of them needed alcohol to remove inhibitions, although there was abundance of beer and booze and gin tonics. No matter the restaurants, no matter the time, it was almost always possible to follow their gaze onto a woman or a girl. Perhaps 30, or perhaps closer to 20. They were all in their 50s, eyeing up young women, projecting their repressed desires onto me, onto Rocco. He perhaps had a better reason not to go after them. He had a girlfriend back home, whom he professed to love. I already did not like him, but when they jokingly exhorted him to forget about her and go chase some Greek or German beauty or another, I perceived some uneasiness in his dismissive laugh. I saw perhaps a glimpse of a principle. He will not betray her. But neither of us did go. Later that night, a restaurant in a narrow street, on the table next to us was full of Italians. All women, all young. Gaetano overheard them and made a suggestive, coarse remark. Then, shouting across the tables, he introduced himself. I remember shuddering, terrified of what he would say. Had he been half as inappropriate as just a minute earlier, he would have been horrible. Instead, he left it unsaid, that is, implied. We all knew. Walking back to the harbor, Rocco was getting antsy. My own father offered him some cigarettes, asking him if he was out and if he wanted some of this. To a 16 or 17-year-old child. Yes, he did smoke already and like a chimney, but to encourage him? Gaetano, who stopped smoking a month or two earlier, sometimes asked him to let him light his cigarettes, to catch a whiff, a hint of the deadly relief. How could Rocco refuse? He was working for him. The teenager enabling the old man. Not a week later, Gaetano was smoking again, hiding it from the wife. I'd see him late at night when everyone else was sleeping and we shared a moment of insomnia. He'd look at me with his cigarette lit. He made us all his accomplices, sharing a secret. It was not, I'm afraid, the only secret we shared. Later on, when the women and children had arrived, I found that Gaetano still made his dirty jokes. But more of them he left implied, puzzling perhaps the women while looking at me and the other men as if we'd know what he meant. I was inside his inner circle, and I didn't want to be. I was appalled, almost sick. It is only human to want to belong. No one wants to be the weird kid. I've been the weird kid all my life, I should know. Here too, I acted a little out of character, as if I knew what I was doing, as if I was enjoying myself. I drank and I ate and I joked too, if with more moderation. And yet I did feel myself out of place. I belonged, but I did not want to belong. I did not want to be there. I did not want to laugh at the dirty jokes or stay silent when this grown man eyed up women half their age. I wanted to punch Rocco in the face, that freeloading entitled asshole. My father seemed to like him, perhaps too much indeed, at least at first. I think he only stopped liking him once he started spending too much time with my sister. They went out late at night, him and my sister and a friend, and came back almost at daybreak. She liked him. I did seem to really be alone in my hatred. They got together once back home. I know he did not treat my sister right, all the way until the end of that rather short relationship, when he dumped her to go back to his previous girlfriend. Yes, that girl whom he thought unthinkable to betray, and whom he cheated on. That girl who took him back. He was an asshole. No one in my family likes him now. He was an asshole, and we all know it now. But what sickens me is that for a short while, I did feel inferior to that asshole. I felt like I had to be a little more like him. And while there is nothing wrong in wishing to be more athletic or resourceful, or to like the same hobbies as my father, the feeling that I had to do these things, to be these things, was a very powerful one. A feeling that I had buried years ago when I stopped caring about the fact that I did not like to play ball. But a feeling so profound and ever present that it resurfaced as soon as I was surrounded by people who never did eradicate it. After his prose piece, I wrote some sonnets. The first one is about Antonio and Gaetano, the men on the second boat. Among captains, mere crew, he's lost, I suppose, clinging to a moral, litter not the sea. Yet his gaze found his way around his nose, up a passing skirt, old horny wannabe. Skirts. Gaetano's punchlines cleverly lie there, on some sweaty bed sheet, in the squalid motels of his memory. A joke only, a comedic deceit. Grown men acting as if teenagers, boys in college once again, or in Berlin, drinking and smoking and raising their voice. Is this the path that today I begin? A face for the wives, a face for the friends. Feral masculinity never ends. The second sonnet is about Rocco. He is, I don't deny, a seaman skilled, and banter and wine, a hint of a beard. Only path to dreams of ocean fulfilled. He's good, isn't he? Then what is it I feared? Perhaps in the twirls of smoke one could see, he too was scared. To not belong, to be cast away, poor and lonely. This rotten tree, seafarers from land to free him at last. Joking, of course, but I still do suggest he should chase some Greek beauty and betray she who waited for him. I saw his unrest. Some morals, perhaps, he did still obey. My greatest fear, that he is, they agree, a seaman, a man I never will be. Third sonnet is about my dad. If only with wives and daughters away is their true face revealed, how can I claim to know my own father? Laugh though he may, I do too, awkwardly, but all the same. I wonder, does he see in Rocco that which I am not? He likes him, humors his vices, ouzo and beers and cigarette, and doesn't see it's a bastard he mentors. Maybe it is I not bastard enough. I who crochet, read too much and hate sport, removed and depressed, forever as low. I who will always of manhood fall short. Manhood or not, I shall do as I please, whether I fail him or his pride appease. And finally, some free verses about myself. I cower behind my powerlessness, silent, staring, sitting, mere observer. I judge without acting. What do I fear? Silence is approval, fear is defeat. But what victory against this monster, this leviathan, this captor of manhood, whence there is no escape, if not inward? Yet within me there is darkness also. It is lonely to refuse the monster. In my search for a moral self, this path, every man must walk by his own accord. Whom can I trust if not my own father? My father who asserts love and support, but himself fell to the beast. I wonder if he judges me, if he wished ever his son was more in his image than mine, my image. A mirror to my soul shows such a painful exile, restless yearning, thought and written word in contemplation, my sole refuge. If only tears repressed, forgotten delusions, abandoned friends will save me now. I who do not play soccer under the sun with the other boys, I who refuse to obey this Leviathan, invented by yourselves, I weep alone. I who will always of manhood fall short. The choice is forced, there is no escaping. The beast on every man impending, the beast that is every man and manhood, the beast only man himself can vanquish. One must build one's character either with or against it. One must find one's own strength. Man, dear man, let weapons dull, drop your guard, and together sail toward merrier shores. And hatred and judgment and monsters we can leave all behind. Your true master need not to be the defeated Leviathan, but friendship and compassion in yourselves. Thank you.
Wow, Giuseppe, that was incredibly vulnerable and daring of you. I appreciate you sharing all those sentiments, and I don't know, I'm gonna follow that up. Wow. This is a story that I've told other people before, but there are some more outgoing, I guess, additions to this story. It's about my father, and the title I've decided on this would be Pen Strokes and Punchlines. The first time I was almost physically assaulted for my writing was in the 4th grade. I was in the middle of a spelling test in Mrs. Castillo's language arts class, and I distinctly remember the look of fury on my best friend Abel's face as I got called to the front of the classroom. I remembered how disparate our sizes were. See, Abel, even then, was 5'8" and dwarfed everyone else in the classroom. I was his best friend in the whole world, but I was more his David to his Goliath. Me and him would often butt heads, but he was one of the most amicable and kindest people I know. And so to see him that outraged at whatever it was scared me a little. It wasn't until I reached the front of the classroom and was confronted by Miss Castillo about what I had supposedly written that I began to realize the efficacy of certain words. You see, I was accused of writing a racial slur on his paper. My name is Tiger. Most people called me Tigger. And with one fell stroke of my pen, writing a cute little note on my best friend's spelling test, I'd inadvertently written an awful word, one that I had no idea the meaning behind, the history, or anything. I was just trying to write my name. I have bad handwriting. In fact, I didn't even know what word was written on there until years later. I was more preoccupied with how badly he misspelled the word ridiculous. But from that moment on, I realized the importance of what words I chose to communicate my ideas, even unintentional ones. You see, language has always been a finicky thing for me. Being the son of 2 Vietnamese refugees, I grew up as an ESL kid, desperate for the validation and acceptance of my English-speaking peers. Once I had finally broken from the confines of monosyllabic grunts that I would occasionally eke out to respond to my schoolmates, I graduated from not being good enough at English to not being good enough at Vietnamese. My mother was, and is to this day, a stay-at-home mom who, by the time I had reached kindergarten, was preoccupied with my then newborn sister, whereas my dad was toiling away under the broiling Texas heat and humidity to hawk Hondas at Houstonians for half a day at a time in the hopes of having something to help keep our homes over our heads. That being said, though I had school and books and friends to supplement the shortcomings in my English speech, my parents were far too busy to do the same for my Vietnamese vernacular. Most of the Vietnamese I had been raised with had evaporated by the time I had reached the age where I was capable of more complex communication. When speaking in English, to this very day, I try and compensate for my background and upbringing. No one would likely suspect that I struggled with speaking if they were to have a chance encounter with me. They'd probably think I was some kind of smooth-talking, silver-tongued southerner with an addiction to alliterative affirmations of my articulative aptitude, or something along those lines. But back then, the only people I cared about impressing with my words were my parents. My mother seemed satisfied with me winning spelling bees and acing literature examinations, but my father was always unresponsive to these achievements. His thinking was, seemingly, that my fascination with the English language and literature and lack of Vietnamese-speaking friends was a betrayal of my culture, a rejection of my heritage. I sensed that was the case after the second or third time of him ignoring my requests to hang out with my friends or go on a field trip if I didn't ask him in Vietnamese. It was after this realization that I began to force myself to compensate for my failures through a grand gesture for my father. You see, Vietnamese is an incredibly complex language, and I know that when I say this, most people imagine our version of alphabet soup looks like ramen noodles, but no, it actually utilizes the same letters as the Latin alphabet. In fact, it only uses 22 out of the 26. The thing that makes it complicated, though, are that multiple accent markings can be used on letters simultaneously, vastly increasing the possible permutations of letters. Speaking Vietnamese was a daunting task because of how subtle shifts in pronunciation would drastically change meaning. But an even more daunting task would be writing it. Most first-generation Vietnamese Americans are sent to special schools in which they are taught nothing but the language for hours a day so as to preserve our verbal tradition. Being so impoverished, my family could never afford the transportation, let alone the actual costs to send me to one of those schools. And so I spent most of my free time allowing my mother to harangue me with impromptu Vietnamese lessons. All this was in the aim of writing my father a Father's Day card, entirely in Vietnamese. I waited until school had let out for the summer so I would have had much more time with my mother, and the second she had any free time at all, I used her spare time translating my writing and rewriting over and over again until I was convinced that I had something worthy of showing my father. That being said, after a certain point, my mother either got too fed up with me or too busy to deal with my, shall we call it, zeal for the Vietnamese language, and I was back to just myself to muddle through. Fortunately, I had recently found the amazing resource that was the internet, and on it, along with every other middle school student trying to learn Spanish, I met my new best friend, Google Translate. I decided to type up a practice letter that I had written in English and run it through Google Translate to avoid troubling my mom any longer. And eventually Father's Day came around. And once my dad got home from work, I knew he was up to bat with my letter. Most nights when he came home, I would be the first to greet him, help him out of his shoes and coat so that he could collapse on the couch. But tonight, I stopped him in the doorway and handed him the painstaking toil of a month's worth of fervent 8-year-old work. And after a perfunctory glance at the carefully decorated envelope, my father promptly tore the entire letter into pieces in front of me, walked straight past me as if I wasn't even there. Now, of course, I was devastated. Truthfully, I was inconsolable. And I've told this story before, but I deign to mention the fact that in between my sobs and, gasps, my me cry in Vietnamese of, how could you do this, was misheard into, who the hell are you to me? Yeah, Vietnamese is like that. My father, after hearing this, summarily beat the ever-living shit out of me. What happened here? Why was my father so cold? Why did he react the way that he did? What the hell did I write in that letter? Well, the answer is upsettingly simple. For anyone who could think back to their AP US history class for a second, or is a fan of super freaking long 18-hour Ken Burns documentary series, Vietnam isn't a country of immense unity. There is a reason why my parents were refugees and not immigrants. The war in Vietnam was not only incredibly divisive, but traumatic for its survivors and descendants. Having been raised during the communist takeover of Vietnam, my dad has an intense hatred for communists. All things communist Vietnam in particular. He has not been back ever since, and it's been 40 years since he arrived in America. And upon his arrival stateside, he had made it his personal mission to destroy every trace of communist Vietnam here in this country that he both loved and abhors. When he was a younger man, he would actively trespass and break into buildings and parking lots that flew the wrong Vietnamese flag, the one with the big yellow star instead of the 3 red stripes. And he would burn flags and smash windows, and he wouldn't frequent restaurants that communist Vietnamese Americans worked at, or probably most importantly, he wouldn't associate with anyone who possessed the incredibly distinct communist Vietnamese accent and dialect. Guess which dialect Google Translate uses? So as you can probably guess by now, once he was handed that letter, and the very first word on there in big frickin' letters was bo instead of ba, the communist Vietnamese way of saying father, he was not at all interested in what the rest of that letter contained. Needless to say, I haven't written any other letters in Vietnamese since then, and my resentment at Google Translate and my younger self persists to this day. And though I spent a lot of time before meeting my girlfriend's parents on Duolingo, trying to learn Spanish because that's her family's native tongue, I forbade her from doing the same for me and my family because Duolingo also uses the communist Vietnamese dialect. And so my father's hatred of this particular form of a language has been passed on to me. And honestly, it makes me question why it was that I was so desperate for the approval of such a hate-filled, spiteful man who fundamentally stands in opposition to nearly every belief and virtue I hold dear. Why has my father's validation always been my white whale? You see, even for a criminal, my father is a weird guy. He would go into a Walmart with an old receipt and walk out with a new TV without paying for it, and still take the time to put the shopping cart back into the corral. Weird dude. Strange morals. But he had a code. Even when he was doing awful things, bigoted things, racist things, whatever it might be, he had a set of rules to abide by. And for whatever reason, I always found myself on the opposite side of whatever he was saying. Now, me and my father actually aren't on speaking terms to this very day. And with all the pieces that have already been spoken about, I feel the need to enumerate all the feelings and resentments that I would have if he were here today. If I could see him right now, what would I say to him? And it's a tried and true trope on TV and movies where after someone passes away, you have all this regret and anguish at all the things that you didn't get to say to them. But honestly, I'm afraid to say anything at all around my father. I honestly found myself in fear of using my own language at home. And it's a finicky thing. Like I mentioned, language is something that we spend most of our lives developing and crafting, unique to ourselves, but intended for other people. And the few times you want your voice to be heard, very rarely does anyone ever actually listen. To this very day, I cannot remember for the life of me what I wrote in that letter. And it honestly doesn't matter. The truth is, I don't really have a way to end this story. I don't have the words for it, which is only fitting considering the circumstances. But I wanted to leave with an immense amount of gratitude and appreciation for all these men who have helped me cultivate my story and share it with you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiger. That was an incredible story. My name's Oliver Lawrence. I'm a junior. My pronouns are he, him, his. In addition to you, Tiger, and thank you for your story, I want to thank Dan for his leadership this semester, facilitating us through 10 weeks. Thank you to Emily for making this event possible. Thank you to my fellow presenters, every one of you, and those who couldn't make it tonight for the powerful stories that we've had tonight and in each of our sessions. And lastly, thank you to the audience for taking the time out of your evening. I apologize if my voice isn't quite great. It's been it's a tough end of the year. This story doesn't have a title. I love my mom. Now, why should you care? Well, it's taken me a very long time to be able to say that to other people. You see, when I was in elementary school, almost everyone got picked up at the end of the day by their mom. Quick aside, the typical role of mothers as homemakers is an entirely separate topic, and I can't even scratch the tip of the iceberg with that today. So moving on. Now, I loved having my mom come pick me up, but I could not and would not express much affection towards her. Other kids would hug their mom when they saw them and hold their hand when leaving the school grounds. Not me. I thought if I showed affection towards her, I'd be seen as weak. I remember her calling me out on it too, pointing out that other boys would hold their mom's hands. Sorry. I was already a small and skinny kid. The last thing I needed in elementary school was other boys calling me a wuss for loving my mama. Now, I have no clue if that actually would have happened, but it didn't matter. In my head, there was an idea. An idea would be the death of me if other guys in my elementary school class knew I loved my mom. I don't know where that idea, that perception of masculinity came from. It likely was a combination of societal norms that I picked up on from TV to watching stereotypical, unemotional, and uncompassionate men in my life. Regardless of the origin, the idea sat with me all the way till high school. In all areas of my life, I carefully calculated my behavior with or pertaining to my mother. I would not bring her up around my friends. When I was with my family, I also made sure not to show too much affection to keep behavior patterns consistent. I'd even go so far as to put her down to people whose respect I desired. I remember one instance in middle school when a friend of mine said to me, "Your mom talks." A little background for you, my mom loves to talk. She'll talk to anyone and everyone. It's one of her greatest traits. One of her favorite parts of working in New York City was riding the subway and talking to people, learning their stories, as she calls it. But when my friend picked up on this characteristic of hers, my response was something like, "Yeah, she's weird." Why would I compliment my mother? Moms are not cool, I thought. Moms are compassionate and loving. I cannot be those things. So better not to support those characteristics. Was it sexist? Maybe. I certainly do not think I was sexist, but there could have been some unconscious prejudice towards feminine characteristics. Sure, plenty of kids and angsty teenagers resent their parents, and I certainly had my fair share of that. However, my attitude towards public care towards my mom eclipsed my teenage angst. In high school, I grew comfortable with myself. I was lucky to have a supportive environment that helped me overcome my own insecurities. My confidence grew as strong and positive female advisors of mine helped change this prejudice in my head. I'm thankful that I don't have no issues anymore. In fact, I'm proud to show care towards the most important woman in my life. To walk down the street with her on my arm, give her a hug in public, or to say to you all that I love my mom. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. And thank you to all the panelists, presenters, participants in this year's Men's Story Project. A lot of those stories I was hearing in full for the first time, as were each other's stories. And I just want to say I'm really proud of us right now. And I don't have adequate words to express how proud I am of us. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. And thank you also to the attendees of tonight's event. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for holding space for us with empathy. And our intention now is if there are questions that you'd like to ask or statements that you'd like to make, to have a dialogue between the panelists and the attendees. And perhaps the best way to collect some of those questions or comments might be using the question and answer function of the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screens. You should see a little box that's got 2 word bubbles and the letters Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, anything that you'd like to ask about individual stories tonight, what the process for arriving at this point has been like, or just anything you'd like to share at all, that's what that Q&A button down there is there for. So I'll give just a couple minutes for folks to write their thoughts, write their questions, and we'll kind of take them as they come in. I wish we were all in the same room together so we didn't have to go through the Zoom technology to have this dialogue. I wish that we could have seen you all as attendees this entire evening and been able to look each other in the eyes. One question that we just received is, how did it feel to present your stories? So this is a question for any of the guys who just shared. How did it feel? How did it feel to present your stories? Anyone want to take that?
I can say from my perspective, there's definitely a combination of the catharsis with getting it out there, but also a certain amount of anxiety with putting that much of yourself out there. But that it definitely, I think, as a whole, it felt good to kind of speak from the heart, kind of thing.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I've told portions of that story before in isolation as sort of like a funny, personal way to get to know me. But like having that kind of less guarded approach to it and getting more into the nitty gritty, being more exposed to everyone and putting yourself out there, it was actually a really powerful experience because honestly, no one in this group has actually heard the full extent of that story. And we'd been working together for months already. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Alex said. I definitely think that this is a very cathartic experience for me because I've been, involved with the group since, like Dan said, last spring 2020. And for the longest time, I was wondering what was my final story going to be, and sort of seeing how that's developed, and being able to present it here has been extremely rewarding. But I think what's an even better experience for me is just being able to hear all of my fellow MSP group member stories. A lot of these stories I've either heard before or had them read in one of our sessions, but they've all sort of evolved on their own, and to just hear them all tonight, it's definitely really special.
Thank you all for speaking on that. One of the other questions that came in was, how was this group formed / how were participants in this program selected? I can speak to at least some of the initial process. I know that the Men's Story Project is like a national program. I'll share the link to their organization in the chat. And I believe this project was grant funded at Colby. I believe that Emily, as a Title IX coordinator and working with issues related to gender at the college, learned about the program and received funds to put it on at Colby. And her next step was reaching out to a facilitator to run the program, and that was me. And I'm not sure how Emily actually selected these specific guys, but you know, there's 9 guys here. We had 15 to start the program, and one of the things that we were looking for in selecting the guys themselves was a range of identities, trying to get as much diversity as possible, and also some folks who are identified as student leaders in campus life in other ways as well. Anything else that anyone wants to say about how you came to this project?
I mean, something I guess I would say just about the formation of the group. I mean, I think one of the things that was cool for me was originally I kind of got asked by Henry and Arthur to do it last year. And then slowly just like kind of like being in these like very like vulnerable group settings with kind of other people I had like kind of seen around or maybe waved to before, and hearing their stories, like kind of like what Dan said, like everyone kind of comes from like a different walk of life that's in this group. And there's something like very like organic in the way it came together. And honestly, most of the time it was a mystery to me how we all came together. But there was something I kind of like liked about it because it just like kind of felt right. And you know, even the people that aren't here tonight, like everyone contributed in such like a valuable way to my experience and the entire group's experience over the last 10 weeks. So.
Thanks, Jackson. One of the final questions that we got time for is, what have you learned from hearing all of these shared experiences? And I love this question because I think it's both appropriate for us as presenters. You know, we're hearing some of these stories for the first time. And I'd be curious to hear from attendees themselves, if there's something that you learned from these shared experiences.
I guess it's kind of very cliche, but like in the process of trying to come up with something to share, I'm not a particularly creative person. So it took a lot of like reflection on my own part, and I kind of learned a lot about myself and my challenges with my own masculinity. So that was really powerful for me. And then also, just like we already said, like hearing everybody else's stories for the most part for the first time. Pretty inspiring, I think, like the diversity across each one of us, how we interacted with our own identities and our shared thread of identity being our own masculinity, but seeing how that kind of is takes different shape within each of us, I think was really, really cool.
To bounce off that, I would just say that, I don't know, I guess I just feel like I walk around campus and I see people and it seems like they have their lives figured out and they're not really going through these struggles, and it's kind of just me on my own. So I think hearing everyone's story and working in this group really, I don't know, made me feel not alone in this, which was really nice.
I wanted to add that even though I've been thinking about masculinity and rejecting of masculinity for quite a long time, hearing other stories, hearing other perspectives and other experiences of masculinity has been incredibly informative, because it is true that there are so many different ways to be a man. There are also so many different ways to be hurt by toxic masculinity. And just, I would not have had the chance to see so many powerful stories had I not participated in this. So it really made me think of masculinity both positively and negatively in a much broader sense and in a much deeper sense as well.
Thank you all. I wish we had more time for this dialogue, but in the name of respecting the amount of time that we have left and hoping that we have, well, asking one more request of audience members. I just want to thank the attendees for asking the questions that they did. And we have one more opportunity for you to provide feedback. as well as ask questions in a feedback form that we're asking attendees to fill out, which I'm throwing in the chat right now. And this link will take you to a Google form, which has just a couple questions. The responses to it are anonymous, and your feedback will help us make this group even better next year, as well as this final event even better. Someone in the Q&A box asked what's next for your group, and I'm hoping that we can do this again next year at Colby College. This is something that, impacts not only the group members, but hopefully the larger community. And we would love the opportunity to get to do this again, if not for ourselves, then for our community. So please help us make it better, even better for next year by following that link, taking some time to fill out the Google form, and providing us with some feedback. That's really all we had planned for y'all tonight. Thank you for following that link and providing that feedback. Thank you for showing up on a Wednesday night on the last day of the academic school year here at Colby. Thank you all, thank you all, thank you all for bearing witness with us and holding space with us. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you to everyone. Have a
Thank
great night,
you.
you guys.
Thanks,
So,
all. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.